from MTN, the Montana Television Network. This is Face the State.
Well, good morning and thank you for joining us for this edition of Face the State. I am Chet Layman along with John Sherer from the MTN station in Bozeman. We are not in Bozeman, however. We're a little further to the south. We're at Mammoth Hot Springs, Yellowstone National Park. And the reason we're here today, 25 years ago this month, our special guest was very busy. It was wolf reintroduction, the anniversary of wolves coming back to Yellowstone National Park. Doug Smith joining us this morning. You were instrumental in that effort. Let's go back in time, Doug. Talk about what was going on here 25 years ago. It was very international down on the road as those trucks brought the first batch of wolves into the park. By March, you were getting ready to release them into the park.
We were. The wolves came in January 1995. They came from Canada. We had to acclimate them because we knew that if we released them on the landscape right away, they might try and head back to Canada. So we wanted to break that homing response. So came in January, held them 10 weeks, and let them go in March. And so it was a big deal. It was a lot of anticipation. You know, wolves are iconic in the West, actually all of North America. They're controversial too. You know, they eat elk. Yet a lot of people think they're kind of environmental saviors. All those things were brewing that day. But, you know, we wiped them out. And so bringing them back was a really big deal. It was park policy. It was Endangered Species Act law. And so the anticipation was tremendous. The emotions were running high. And, you know, so that magic moment of them coming through the arch down in Gardner was a big deal. And, you know, we met them and we took them out to the pens and carried them in. You were here for that. Seems so long ago, but it also seems like a blink of an eye too. And the wolves have gone forth and really changed Yellowstone, changed the West. You know, we hear about that a lot, but it's mostly for the good, I think, and we've figured it out. I think the states and the park, and so it's been largely a good run for 25 years.
The things I remember, of course, other than watching that truck bring the wolves in the pens and getting to do that, and then walking in and seeing the wolves in that, is all the work that went in before that. I mean, we went to the meetings and you spoke and other folks spoke and talking about this is going to change the park, but it's not going to decimate the elk population. It's not going to decimate the bison. And those were things that people were saying. And it was very controversial and very angry at times. Just take me back through some of that the education part on the front end of that was, to me, it seems like that was more work than actually carrying the boxes and opening the door and let them into those pens.
I mean, it was. Wolves are loaded and emotional and value laden. And so you use the word education. Educating people about wolves is very difficult to do. Most people's minds are made up of what they think about wolves. And it comes from your upbringing, it comes from your family and your friends. So, you know, a government official like me is not going to change your mind. And so that's one thing that's really hard about wolves. And the things we heard the most were they're going to wipe out all the elk and hunting's going to end as we know it. That didn't happen. Someone's going to get injured or killed. That hasn't happened. It's going to decimate the livestock industry. You know, the livestock wolves kill, and they do kill livestock occasionally, is diminishingly small. So those are the big three things people were worried about. And you know, educate is a way to look at it, but more the way we like to look at it is, you know, talking to people. Why do you fear wolves? Why do you think wolves are bad? Can we share the landscape? Places like Yellowstone are not human-dominated landscapes. What's wrong with them there? Granted, they spell out and they are across the state of Montana. That's a harder thing to manage, but we can do it. And, you know, sitting down and talking and sharing, that's what our goal's been for the last 25 years. We hope it continues for the next 25. You know, I've always been painted as kind of a bunny hugger, environmentalist who loves wolves and hates elk. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. I love elk, I hunt deer, I like guns, I ride horses. You know, those are common ground things that, but you know, I like wolves too, that we can talk about, and they make Montana. I mean, we don't want to be like the Midwestern states, which is a sea of corn and agriculture. We have grizzly bears, we have cougars, we have wolves. That makes it better for us. And I think the last 25 years really has demonstrated that. So we do have history and evidence to show it doesn't have to be that bad. And what I heard the most 25 years ago is, this is an awful idea. They're being crammed down our throats. This is going to ruin life as we know it. There have been some problems, of course, but that's life.
I remember one situation, though, you sitting in a meeting, I don't remember where we were, but somebody saying, this is ridiculous. 10 years after you do this, I'm going to have to be keeping my dog in my house, and this person lived in Bozeman, because there's going to be 10,000 wolves roaming all over the countryside. And I mean, you handled it very professionally. There was that kind of misinformation on the front of it. The wolves are going to take over, and Little Red Riding Hood is going to be eaten, and that's how it's going to go. That was kind of the misinformation on the front end of that you had to kind of soften some of that. And wait a minute, it's not going to take away every elk. They're not going to be eating your children in downtown Bozeman 90 miles away. That's not going to happen.
No, and the practices of modern day wildlife management won't let that happen. Wildlife management is an advanced science now. A lot of people know how to do it. Those doom and gloom, wolf growth rate is never constant. It's not a linear function. It doesn't just grow, and before you get 10,000 wolves. It curves off when they start getting too many. Plus, people have hunting seasons, trapping seasons. Those things get taken care of. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. We can have a view of both worlds, too. And I do think it makes life better. I do think we can talk about these things. But that's really the important feature here is, these big ideas about how things are going to go wrong and life's going to end as we know it. We can work through that. And look at what wolves have brought to the park. I mean, people come from all over the world to see wolves here. It's been estimated to generate $35 million of economic activity. Tourism's one of the top 3 economic drivers to all of Montana. People who come to Yellowstone, their top 2 wildlife species to see are wolves or grizzly bears, Sherer Lake bison and elk and moose too, but wolves are always topping the list. This is a big part of life here, and it's an economic driver, and we've managed it. Hunters and ranchers haven't taken the brunt of this. It's all worked in, and there are bad places to have wolves, but there's good places too. We need to look at it from that perspective rather than black and white. It's over, They're going to take our guns away or something like that. It's not that black and white.
When you look back at what you thought the world around Yellowstone would be like in 25 years, are we there? How has your vision played out? Has it turned out the way you thought it would?
I mean, kind of. I mean, the big reason to restore wolves was mainly it was policy and law, but also was to restore an out of balance ecosystem. I mean, let's face it, and I wasn't allowed to talk about this 25 years ago, the elk population was overpopulated. I mean, in brief, early on in Yellowstone, we had a poor view of predators. Even though this is a national park, and we killed all the wolves and the cougars and the coyotes off. Bears were reduced too, and so then the elk population grew. And so we controlled elk for 40 years. We started controlling elk in 1923, that went all the way to 1968. Wolves were shot by hunters, shot by rangers, or shipped to 36 states and 6 countries where elk had been wiped out due to market hunting. Yellowstone was used to repopulate those rangers. That doesn't sound like an intact ecosystem when you're managing it like that. No predators and you're controlling elk. That just isn't, to use a value-laden word, healthy. And so, bringing wolves back, I thought the primary driver was to restore the ecosystem. Cougars came back on their own. Bears were never eliminated, but they increased. And so there has been a lot of changes. Sometimes those have been overestimated. The scientific term is called trophic cascade. That has occurred. Yellowstone, I think, is better than it's ever been. And it's as carnivore rich or predator rich as it's ever been. That's hard for some people to stomach who grew up in a world of values that has predators as killers. But what wasn't seen was the joy and pleasure and economic gain it's given people. We didn't think the wolves were going to be visible. We didn't think anyone was going to see them. And now, if you spend 3-4 days in Yellowstone, you're almost, in strong words, guaranteed to see a wolf. And where else can you go to see a wild animal like that? And that has been a sensation and something nobody saw coming. Nobody talked about it. And we had tons of preliminary studies. What's it going to mean to have wolves back? I think now the biggest benefit has been to people in terms of their enjoyment, pleasure, and learning about nature. Really big on that one.
How about the problems? Are the problems as bad or not as bad as you thought they might be?
I mean, with wolves, you just got to admit it, there's always problems. And in my view, they're not as bad. I mean, you know, wolves eat elk, wolves eat deer, and so hunters were worried. Well, if you look at the statewide elk population now, compared to 25 years ago when we released wolves, it's more elk now than there was then. Now, there are hunting districts that are predator rich that will have fewer elk, maybe below objective, and that's a fact of life, but most hunting units are at or above objective. So in terms of hunting, wolves really haven't changed that much, and wolves are a huntable species too. So that's an added animal to the list that hunters can pursue. In terms of livestock, you know, it's always way less than 1% of the causes of livestock death. They do kill livestock. It's very rare. Government agency Wildlife Services has got a great handle on that. My phone conversations with the state lead on that is, geez, it's been a quiet summer. That tends to be the conversation topic. No one's been injured or killed by wolves. You know, people, those are the three things people talked about a lot. And so I think this has been a net gain to Montanans.
The thing I remember you were talking about, people were saying, why are you going to add wolves to the park? And you spent a lot of time having to say, well, wait a minute. They were here before. This isn't an addition of a species into a park. It's a return of a species. The wolves were here. We took care of that, and now we're going to try to fix that situation that we did. That educational part, I think there's still some people that said, somebody in Washington, D.C. had this idea to bring these animals to Yellowstone National Park because it's a great place for wild animals. That's not what happened. This was a restoration of a population.
That's very correct, Chet. And I oftentimes get hung up on words, and you shouldn't do that. You know, detail, you know, life is about big things, not little things. But it's a reintroduction. It's not an introduction, which was what some people thought. They were here. The documentary evidence of that is overwhelming. We killed them off. That's park policy. That's kind of written in stone for the National Park Service, is to restore and preserve nature. The big question is, how do you do it without all of the native constituents, all the original inhabitants? And wolves are a keystone species, which means they occur at fairly low density or low numbers, but have outsized impacts on all kinds of things. And so North American ecosystems, like Yellowstone, through time developed to have wolves here. And their impacts with cougars and bears are called top-down effects. And we took that out. So the park responded and changed. All we did was bring them back. And we feel it's better now than it was because of this restoration, not introduction. Great question.
When we drove up this morning, we were talking about, because you go right by the campground. It's been a long time since I've seen elk eating the trees in the campground. That has been a change. I'm not a biologist. I don't know anything. I just know what I see. The question I wanted to ask you, though, is we're sitting right on the edge of this gigantic lab. Yellowstone National Park is a lot of things, but it is a lab. We know more about grizzly bears because of Yellowstone. We are learning about the mountain lions. We know about elk. We know about bison. 25 years worth of study on wolves. What have we learned here about wolves?
Well, great question. I mean, what you're referring to is the value of national parks. As ecological baselines. You know, our goal is preservation, which is no use, as opposed to conservation, which is wise use. And they're both worthy, but they're different. And so when you try and minimize human influences, that can serve as an ecological baseline. And that is a true value of places like Yellowstone and other national parks. And the other benefit we had, and this is rare, almost all the wolf studies done prior to Yellowstone go into a population that was already there. And you catch some wolves and you put radio collars on them, and there are always just a few wolves, and you try and figure out what's going on. Here it was the reverse. There were no wolves. And Yellowstone's one of the better studied places in the world in terms of ecology and wildlife. So we had a pretty good idea what was going on without wolves. And then we had the rare opportunity to handle every wolf before we let it go, and so it had a radio collar, so the complete population was marked. And we have maintained that. Not every wolf, it's too hard to do, born in the wild, you gotta catch them, but we've maintained contact with most of our packs for the most part. And so we have been able to see how the population has developed, adapted to Yellowstone, how it's impacted the elk, didn't wipe them out, how they interacted with grizzly bears, coyotes, the vegetation. This has really been a rare opportunity, and we've advanced the knowledge about wolves probably in unprecedented fashion compared to other places that study wolves worldwide.
One of the things I remember somebody asking you is, all right, when you do this, how many wolves are going to be in the park? And I'll never forget your answer. I don't know. It struck me that you would have the courage to say that, and you were honest about that. We don't know what's going to happen. That's what we have to figure out. The population will, I think people, it balances. You talked about that earlier here, that it'll work itself. We don't know exactly what that's going to be like. What do we know now? 25 years, you've got some good baselines, I would think, to know where we are with that population.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great point. You know, scientists sometimes get a bad rap because, you know, people think we're know-it-alls. Figuring out the world's really hard. Predicting the future is almost impossible. So that's kind of why I gave that answer. But what we did learn is wolves, the first probably 12, 14 years, they did have high growth rates. I mean, there were a ton of elk here. The elk were basically almost essentially non-predated upon population. And so the wolves did very well with that. So they grew rapidly, but they had a couple disease outbreaks that knocked them back. But they bounced right back because there were still a lot of elk. Then they had a disease outbreak, their population declined, and they've stayed flat. And we've learned a lot about what makes wolf populations tick. And we've learned that really the most important thing is adult survival, not necessarily producing pups, which a lot of people previously thought was the key. So we've learned that these things don't keep growing forever, that they do have kind of a mechanism that dampens their population growth. And another one that we've really learned about, in the absence of human hunting, which in most environments is the driver to wolf population fluctuation, we've learned that wolves killing each other really can't dampen their population growth. And we saw this vividly in 2008 as the elk population had declined, the elk were in better condition, it was harder for wolves to make a kill, they started killing each other at a higher rate. And that combined with lowered reproduction, so a drop in survival and a drop in recruitment, we call it pup production, caused the population decline. And it's been flat ever since about 2008, around 10 packs, 100 wolves, as compared to a high of 16 packs, over 170 wolves in the early 2000s when they were preying on that huge elk population. And so things have kind of equilibrated, and the really tough message to communicate, I want to emphasize this, is yes, there's fewer elk. Wolves were part of the decline, not all of the decline, because we have bears, we have cougars. The state of Montana was managing for fewer elk outside the park as well. So we have fewer elk, and if you're a hunter, that's a tough message. But for ecosystems and ecology, less is more. Very, very hard to communicate. The National Park Service views this as a success story, but it's still hard to say, how can fewer elk be good? It was because they were overpopulated 25 years ago, and they were damaging the range, they had density dependence, all these things kicked in when you're sitting at what the level that the environment can support. And so that's been a big part of what we've learned, how these natural systems work in the absence of predators to a fully restored predator guild.
I have a question about that elk-wolf dynamic. CWD is on the doorstep of Yellowstone Park. If, probably more likely when, it does enter the park, how is that going to affect the wolf population?
Well, for one, wolves are kind of immune to CWD. It passes through their system and they don't get it. And I'm not sure why, but that's what I've been told. But, you know, we just finished a book summarizing the whole last 25 years, coming out in October, called Yellowstone Wolves, Science and Discovery in the World's First National Park. And so it summarizes a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So I get the question a lot of time, what are you going to do the next 25? And CWD is a big one. And so right now we're starting to tool up for that. And what we're trying to do is we think, this is a hypothesis, I don't want to be criticized for this because everyone says scientists are pie in the sky. It is slightly speculative, but predators could have a cleansing effect or an ability to reduce the spread of CWD. They're going to spot animals that have it and take them out from spreading the disease when they're at a stage, because these animals can get it and be around for a year or more. But they're going to spot an animal that's got CWD that we can't see that something's wrong with it and get rid of it from the population. And so that's going to reduce the spread of CWD. In some environments, wolves reduce the group size of elk. Anytime, we know from research on brucellosis, anytime the population size, the group size is reduced, disease transmission goes down. And so, Yellowstone, I've said this earlier in the interview, is one of the most predator-rich places you'll find anywhere, the West, North America. And so right now we're writing a computer model, and people don't like models because they're all math, but we don't have any data now. And it's going to take 10 or 20 years to get data on CWD because we're looking for it. The state's looking for it, they found it, we're looking for it, we haven't found it. Will there be a predator effect? Will it not get into Yellowstone? And if it does, will it be reduced? Because predators are going to spot it early, take that animal out. And so that really, John, is one of our pressing questions the next 25 years. The model is going to be theoretical, then we test it by gathering data, but it's going to be slow to unfold. And hopefully we'll learn a lot, because a lot of people do talk about this predator effect on the spread of CWD. Great question.
Do you have any contingencies? Or, like if your prognosis or your prediction doesn't pan out, do you have like A, B, and C plans, anything like that?
Well, there's other people in Yellowstone working on diseases. Disease is not my main area. We're beginning to formulate those. Obviously, we're going to have a response. The National Park Service won't be immune to things that are happening around the park, but it's a tough one. It's a tough thing for states to handle, both Wyoming and Montana, where I've read about it hitting. This is a tough one. Our role is to look for it, which we're doing, and then test this idea of the predator effect. And I think there will be one. There has been a study with cougars and deer in Colorado that definitely showed what I'm talking about. So we want to be on top of it. We are formulating a response to that. So we'll see.
The question I want to ask is, when this all started, these were wolves from Canada. They're Canadian wolves, and that was some of the complaint about all of this. Here we are 25 years later. Is there such a thing as a Yellowstone? Has this population adapted, evolved, done what? Is it different? Is it a different kind of wolf? Are we to that point where it's a different, unique kind of wolf?
Chet, thank you for answering that question. That is one of the most commonly asked questions we get. The wolves reintroduced are the wrong wolf.
Right.
And when people talk to me, they love emphasizing the word Canadian wolves. Wolves are one of those species that, our naming of things is an artificial construct that people came up with. It works great until you get down to the fine details. And, the fine details are based upon isolated populations that don't interbreed. Wolves interbreed all over the continent. They are constantly moving around. And so the whisker of difference between wolves from one region to another really isn't that big. Are we going to test for that idea? Absolutely. We have a skull collection in Yellowstone. When wolves die, we try and get to them. We collect their skull, we clean it up. So through time, and this was the top wolf taxonomist in North America who visited Yellowstone, told me to do this, so we did it. We can test to see if wolves are changing through time by looking at their skulls. This was his best measure, he said you should gather. And are we developing into a Yellowstone wolf? My guess is a wolf's a wolf's a wolf, because again, they move around at such wide areas that they're constantly swapping genes with each other. It's not like a mouse that can't get across a river. There's no interbreeding. You get two different subspecies on opposite sides. Wolves aren't like that. Nothing stops a wolf. But because we have so many critics, that's one thing I've learned to deal with. Got to have thick skin, broad shoulders. We're testing for that. We're looking to see if this unique Yellowstone wolf is evolving. The other criticism we get where there are wolves here when we release them. You know, the best bird dog for a wolf is another wolf. You turn them loose in the land. Now, we looked for them, didn't find anything. People in the 70s looked for them, didn't find anything. The best way, though, is to turn a wolf loose with a collar so you can track it and see if that wolf turns up any other wolves. They didn't. So those are two really big criticisms that, yeah, sure, people love to disagree, they love to criticize. Yeah, let us have it, but they turned out to not be true. And the other key thing, too, is elk from Yellowstone went to Alberta and British Columbia, where we got the wolves from, when those elk were killed off because of market hunting. So our elk repopulated those Canadian ranges. So the wolves had already been preying on Yellowstone elk for a long time. So we kind of reunited them up there and down here. So to say that these wolves were bigger and maladapted to prey on our elk, they had already been doing it in Canada. That's another key point. It was a two-way street, not just we brought the elk down, or excuse me, the wolves down here.
So what's the future for you? How much longer are you going to stay with the wolves?
I don't know. It's been a ringside seat, and I've loved every minute of it. It really was the opportunity of a lifetime. You know, you love what you know, and I moved here from the Midwest of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, heritage, studying wolves, and actually I didn't want to leave because I was intimate with that landscape. Studied wolves there, studied beavers there, and so I kind of came here for the job opportunity. After 25 years in Yellowstone, now I don't want to leave it either because being there to see the park change, to be there every year, month, week, day, to see this thing play out, it is hard to walk away from.
Before we wrap this up, Doug, I just want to ask you about this. While you're out and around the park, these people are standing with their spotting scopes and their cameras who've traveled from all over the world, literally, just to see wolves. How does that make you feel? Because you're kind of a big part of why they're able to do that. How does that make you feel?
You know, Chet, I don't think about it that way. The wolves, I think, deserve most of the credit, and the fact that they're in and people are enjoying it. And, I didn't think that was a primary reason to restore wolves. I was straight ecologist, biologist, where we're storing them because this is part of bringing nature back. Is it ethical to completely wipe out a species? That's what I thought about. Visitor enjoyment, which is a boilerplate goal of the National Park Service, wasn't so much on my mind. I think I've flipped now. Seeing those people out behind the scopes, so excited, people coming up to me crying, who have hugged me, who have thanked me, and I kind of am like, for what? But just that, I love nature. That's been one of the driving forces of my entire life. To see people connect with nature like that is not that common in this world today. I mean, it's actually rare, and I think we need more of that. And so that really, and I hate to use a tired phrase, but warms my heart. And it's mostly about the wolves. If I had a small part of it, well, all the better. But it is still kind of cool, though.
That's fantastic. Again, Doug Smith, 25 years ago, helping bring wolves back to Yellowstone National Park, and today joining us for this edition of Face the State. Doug, thank you. On behalf of John Sherer, I am Chet Layman. We want to thank you as well for joining us for this edition of Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.